Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Goeckner. I'm a cultural anthropologist with the American Indian Health Research and Education Alliance. And I just want to thank you for coming to my talk today, Beyond Skinwalkers and Indian Burial Grounds, Contemporary Belief in Anomalous Phenomena Among American Indians. So although it's not often recognized, many of the most popular paranormal phenomena, as well as their associated beliefs and practices, have their roots in American Indian cultural and spiritual traditions. Whether it's beliefs about mysterious hominids roaming the American wilderness, skinwalkers, or the practice of burning sage to cleanse individuals and spaces when it really should be cedar, many trace their origins back to beliefs indigenous to the Americas. Unfortunately, this does not mean that popular beliefs reflect native beliefs about the same phenomena. These inaccuracies and distortions often misrepresent native cultural and spiritual traditions. A great example of this is the perpetuation of the Indian burial ground trope, which started as a literary invention and has now become a really popular explanation for hauntings around the United States. And you can see the sort of the fruits of this, or what perpetuates these misunderstandings through the use of problematic ethnographic sources from turn of the 20th century salvage ethnographies, media misrepresentations, and misunderstandings about the relationship between paranormal and supernatural belief and health and well-being in these communities. Now, above all of this, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings for many non-native people is that there is the tremendous diversity that there is within Indian country. So today we have 574 federally recognized tribes. There's an additional 60 or 70 state recognized groups as well. And each of these has their own unique cultural and spiritual traditions that are individual to those groups, but are often conflated as some sort of monolithic Native American culture in the singular. Now, most of our work has centered around health and educational disparities. And so we set out last fall to sort of design a longitudinal study of Native health, which we called 7 Generations, a study of Native health, to develop a clearer understanding of trends in health across Indian country, because there isn't one to date, and the best data that exists would be with the Indian Health Service, but they don't like to share. And so we kind of set out to build the beginnings of a longitudinal study to capture this. And so we covered a whole bunch of different topics, from things that you would expect, like diet and exercise, mental health, quality of life, men's and women's wellness, as well as things that maybe are a little less orthodox. So things like spiritual health, and what we're going to talk about today, knowledge and beliefs about paranormal phenomena. And we did this for 2 reasons. One, like I mentioned previously, that we wanted to illustrate that relationship between ideas about anomalous phenomena, specifically around the paranormal and supernatural, and health and well-being, as well as the fact that there's really no widespread study of contemporary belief in anomalous phenomena in Native communities. So researchers and investigators, academic or otherwise, who don't have strong ties to these communities don't really have good sources to turn to, and so that's what kind of perpetuates these misunderstandings. Now, just to give you a kind of quick rundown of how this project worked, participants came into the project either through our listserv of previous research participants or through Facebook advertisements. Anyone who was 18 and over and self-identified as American Indian was eligible to participate. They would come into the primary survey, which covered some general health topics, as well as things like interest in participating in research. And then based on those responses, they would be filtered into various secondary surveys, secondary interviews, and tertiary interviews. Among those secondary surveys was our Paranormal Knowledge, Attitudes, Beliefs, and Behaviors survey. Anyone who participated in the primary could participate in this one, and then based on responses there regarding their experiences with the paranormal and their frequency with seeking out knowledge or information about the paranormal, determined whether or not they got into a paranormal beliefs or a paranormal experiences interview. Now, as you can see, you can take a look at our numbers. This is quite a few people. We're very proud of the numbers we got. But if you look at when we finished recruiting, you'll see that we just finished doing this. And so we're kind of in the beginnings of the tail end of the cleaning process. So I'm just going to be talking about preliminary data today from the survey as well as the paranormal beliefs interviews. So quickly, I just want to talk about who our participants were in the paranormal survey. So you can see our average age there, but we had a wide range of participants from 18 to 77 participate. Most of our sample was female, which wasn't surprising for us, partly because women participate in research more frequently than men do, and this is true in our experience in Native communities as well. You see, we also had a small portion of our sample that identified as a Indigenous gender minority. So many of these communities have third and fourth genders. So that's what that 3% is there. And we also had a couple trans individuals and one non-binary. Now, one thing we like to look at in our research is where participants grew up. This is because we found that it can be a proxy, although it's not a perfect one, for individuals' connectedness to their community's cultural beliefs and traditions. And so you can see here that about 53% of our sample identified as growing up on a reservation, 23% in a rural area, 14% in a suburban area, 5.5% in tribal trust land, which is a similar category to reservations, although somewhat different. Google's your friend on that one. Look it up. It's mostly only a category in Oklahoma. And then 23% in urban environments, and then less than 0.5% on military bases. Now, if you're better at math than I am, you'll notice that that doesn't add up to 100. The reason for that is because this is a check all that apply question. Now, we were also interested in how participants identified religiously and spiritually. And so this is showing you a selection of our participants from the paranormal survey. Now, the reason I say it's a selection is why we have an asterisk here, because this question actually doesn't come out of the paranormal survey. So participants' responses across all parts of this study are linked together. So like we only have to ask the demographic questions in the primary, and we can reference back based on what subset of the participants we want to look at. So of our participants in the paranormal survey, 467 of them did the spiritual health survey, which is most of them. That's where this question comes from. And so you'll see here that most of our sample identified as most closely with their tribe's spiritual tradition, as well as NAC, and then kind of a smattering of various Protestant and other Christian groups, as well as a small sample that identified as Jewish. Now, we were really curious with this project to understand where participants were getting their information about the paranormal. And so one of the questions we asked was specifically about where they thought they had received most of their knowledge about the paranormal throughout their entire life. And so that's what you're looking at here. And so this represents about 78% of our sample. There's an additional 9 categories that aren't shown here, but none of those got above 5% of the participants, and so I didn't include them in this graphic. Now, one thing that I want to point out here is that while paranormal media, including social media, which is a place where many non-natives encounter information about native beliefs regarding paranormal phenomena, is a strong influence on belief for many in the general public, this was less true among American Indians, reflecting the importance of understanding the embeddedness of these beliefs in larger cultural and spiritual contexts. So if you look here, you can see if we include personal experiences with family members, community elders, and religious or spiritual leaders, we're looking at almost 50% of the influence. Now, in the paranormal survey, participants were asked to what degree they thought a variety of phenomena were real. And so they were asked on a Likert scale from definitely not to definitely real. And you can see here some of their responses. This isn't quite every category, but this is the vast majority of them. I think there's only 5 or 6 that weren't included here. But you can see that in the tan there, those are all different types of beings or entities. In the blue, you're looking at spiritual phenomena. The red is extraterrestrial phenomena. The purple is psychic phenomena. And then lastly, in the green there, that's our other category with geographic anomalies and astrology. They didn't really fit in any of our other categories. Two things I want to point out here. First of all, is that among our participants, there really was not a strong belief in psychic phenomena. And so you can see that here, that most participants either didn't think it was real or fell somewhere in the middle of the road. And then on the other hand, you can see that over 60% of our participants thought angels and ghosts and hauntings were real. Angels surprised us a little bit, and so we're looking forward to some more robust analysis to see kind of what relationships we can determine from there. Or for many of our participants, belief in anomalous phenomena were strongly influenced by oral traditions within their communities. So participants were asked this specific question about various phenomena in the survey, and I pulled 2 data points here for you to look at. both from ghosts and spirits and from unexplained beings or cryptids. And you can see that 63% of our participants thought that oral traditions and folklore explaining ghosts and spirits were evidence of their existence, and 66% thought the same for unexplained beings or cryptids. And this was reflected really strongly in our interviews too, where we had, a Zuni participant talking about the relationship between witchcraft and the creation narrative of his community, as well as an Anishinaabe woman talking about funerary practices and how they relate to ideas about a spiritual journey to the afterlife. Now, this, for us, illustrates how most of our participants approach anomalous phenomena as believers rather than seekers, undergirding the importance of cultural narratives surrounding such phenomena. In other words, belief in these things are already integrated into their worldviews instead of requiring reshaping of more mainstream perspectives. Now, another example here comes from a Potawatomi and Kickapoo participant who was talking about how in his community there's an idea that spirits will come to this plane or this existence to help shepherd the spirit of the recently deceased on to the afterlife, and some will stick around and can be important for healing traditions in that context. Now, we also heard from folks that talked a lot about Bigfoot. Bigfoot was really popular across lots of our interviews. And one thing that kept coming up a lot was this idea that Bigfoot was related to contemporary Indigenous communities. And this idea that Bigfoot was representative of a different clan was something we heard from participants in a lot of different parts of the United States from completely different and unrelated communities. And so we also heard, this idea that at one point in the past, their ancestors lived side by side with them and were helped with hunting or herbal medicine and things like that. Now, one thing that really stood out to us in comparison to non-native beliefs about anomalous phenomena was the role of experiences during spiritual gatherings and ceremonies that drove belief for many of our participants. So it wasn't just that cultural and spiritual traditions provide an environment for those beliefs to thrive, but that the practices associated with these teachings provided opportunities for participants to experience such phenomena for themselves. One of our participants talked about specifically going to drum religion doings or gatherings and seeing what he described as glistening, almost like these sparks that were appearing in the room where they were having the ceremony. And this was explained to him as evidence that the spirits had come to their gathering. Now, one of our biggest takeaways that didn't come as a surprise to us, but is extremely important for understanding certain aspects of Native cultural and spiritual traditions, is the appropriateness of sharing certain kinds of information to the public. A common misconception among non-natives that Native peoples are unwilling to share information about their traditions for seemingly arbitrary reasons. However, as our interviewees demonstrated, certain kinds of information are meant for specific audiences, or might have particular protocols or stigma surrounding their dissemination. For example, certain spiritual practices, or talking about skinwalkers or wendigos. Now, historically, non-natives have often ignored this context, resulting in misunderstandings at best and appropriation of Native traditions at worst. And this example comes from one of our participants who was talking about, her willingness to talk about her experiences and beliefs about different phenomena, and how she felt more comfortable talking with people in her own community because of some of these issues. Now, although these are just preliminary findings, they demonstrate the importance of culturally grounded approaches to exploring Native people's beliefs about anomalous phenomena, especially as they relate to cultural and spiritual well-being. Now, I want to leave you with just a piece of advice that we've heard countless times across Indian country and from our interview participants. So if you don't want to experience anything spooky in your life, please make sure you don't whistle at night. Thank you.